Okay. Well, good morning. I officially welcome you to our webinar. We are incredibly proud to be hosting today. And at First Five, if you're new to First Five, our vision is that one day the success of our county and our state are going to be measured by the well-being of our youngest children. And our mission is to build the early childhood systems and supports that are needed to ensure that our youngest children are safe and healthy and ready to succeed in school and life. And our webinar today is a step in that direction as we turn our attention to the power of mattering. We are very, very grateful for our partnership between Lake County Child Welfare and Chabot Las Positas Community College District for providing the funding to make this webinar free to you today. And we are just acknowledging that in the room and potentially later in the recording, we are joined by foster parents, service providers from across Lake County, including those who are working in early childhood education, social work, prevention, healthcare, behavioral health, and family outreach, and probably more that I haven't even mentioned. We're also really pleased to welcome all of our colleagues from across California today. Welcome one and all, and thank you so much for the important work that you do. Go ahead and keep yourselves on mute just as a housekeeping item. Unless you have a question, you can also be using the chat. I've seen some comments coming through the chat already, so that's a great way to interact. And as you can tell, this webinar is being recorded, and we will post the recording on the First Five Lake YouTube channel just as soon as it's available later today, probably, if not tomorrow. So without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce today's guest speaker and our new friend, Zach Mercurio. Earlier this year, Zach did provide another webinar for us, if you were able to attend that one in January, on building resilience on purpose. And that recording is still available on our YouTube channel as well. And you're going to want to go back and watch that. We learned so much and we wanted to bring him back. Zach is a writer and a speaker and a researcher and a consultant, and he's intent on cultivating purposeful leaders, which I know so many of you today are, and building positive organizations. So his writing has been featured in Forbes and Psychology Today and the Denver Post and the Huffington Post, to name a few, and his clients included, well, First Five Lake, shout out, and Hewlett Packard, Kroc, and the National Park Service, the Alzheimer's Association of America, folks like that who really appreciate what he brings to the table, just like we do. And Zach is joining us today from Colorado, where he lives with his family. So Zach, thank you so much for joining us once again. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn things over to you.
Thanks, Carla. Thanks everybody for being here. And Carla mentioned the vision, right, of the well-being of our children as a benchmark for the well-being of where we are and who we are. And one of the core elements of well-being is the experience that we matter as human beings. It's almost impossible for anything to matter when we feel like we don't matter. And one of the things that I study in the Center for Meaning and Purpose at Colorado State University is what predicts human flourishing, not only in the first decade of life, but the second, third, fourth, fifth decade of life, where we all are. And what we find is it goes back to being around people who reaffirm our significance. And that's what's so powerful, right? We all have the power to give each other the evidence of our significance. And when people feel significant, they become significant. When we have something to live for, we live better lives. And so we're going to talk about this core element of thriving and flourishing today, both in the context of working with children, but also in the context of working with each other and maintaining the belief that you matter. Because oftentimes it can be very easy to know that you matter, but as you go forth through a career of service, it can be easy to get distracted by all the things that are happening, everything we have to get through. And sometimes we can forget our own significance. So I hope some of these tools will help you give each other and yourself the evidence of your own significance as we move forward. So let's jump in today. I want to let you know we're going to have 2 breakout sessions today, and we are going to use a handout that was just perfectly timed to pop into the chat right now that you can double click on as a PDF and download that. It's fillable, so you don't have to print it out. You can pull it up and input some of your thoughts right into that. And it also has a self-scoring, mattering self-assessment. Don't do that yet, because we're going to do that today at the end. I know some of you all may be the ones that go right to the end of the packet and you start doing all the work, but really immerse yourself in here where we're at today. So breakout rooms, and we'll use this as a supplement to follow along. So let's jump right in. So what is mattering? Mattering is the belief that we are a significant part of the world around us. It's the belief and the feeling that we are noticed, we are seen for our unique selves, we are affirmed. People show us exactly how our unique strengths make a unique difference in the world around us, in the community around us, in the family around us, in the group around us, and that we're needed, that we are indispensable as human beings, that someone relies on us, that we are an integral part of some bigger whole right now, no matter where we are. Mattering is achievement independent. So we oftentimes, like when we're working with kids, I hear this a lot, like, oh, when you just get into high school or when you just get into college, then you'll make it, right? And mattering is the belief that we are worthy, significant, noticed, affirmed, and needed right now, where we are. And so we're going to talk about how do we create repeated moments of mattering. And moments of mattering create two dimensions. And these are the two dimensions that are going to encompass all of the practices we dig into today. The first dimension is the feeling that I'm valued as a person. These are things like, you know my full name. You ask about my life. You know my struggles. You remember me. You miss me. You check in on me. Now, you may be thinking that this sounds like common sense. And the problem is that common sense is mostly not common practice. For example, do you know your delivery driver's last name? Right? Do you know if your barista has kids? Do you know a child's middle name, or do you know who relies on them outside of the contact with you and who they rely on? Do you check in on them about that struggle from last week? Do you remember them, right? So oftentimes we can take it for granted that this is important, and it can result in lapses of strategic curiosity, which creates the feeling that I'm valued. The second dimension is that I add value, that me, who I am right now, and my unique gifts and my unique strengths and the unique personality that I bring to wherever I am in my unique journey adds value to the environment I'm in. I make a difference. You show me how I make a difference. You name my unique gifts and strengths. You ask for my opinion. You give me a responsibility, and you show me that I'm relied on. So these two dimensions are going to encompass the practices we go over. Mattering results from feeling valued and knowing exactly how I add value. And like I said, the problem is common sense is usually not common practice. How do we know it's not common practice? Well, let's take children. There was a recent study done of over 66,000 kids from 5th grade all the way through 12th grade. And there was a simple question that was asked: how many of you all think that your teacher would notice if you were absent tomorrow? Over half of that sample, 33 plus thousand kids, indicated they did not think their teacher would notice if they were absent. When we look at what's happening in the workplace, upwards of 60% of people in various occupations indicate they feel invisible at work. Upwards of 43% of people say they feel undervalued in the place that they work. And why is this important when we think about children, especially? Research finds that upwards of 1/3 of children under the age of 13, over 35% when surveyed, from surveys of over 5,000 children, indicate low experiences of feeling like they matter, like they're noticed, they're seen, they have unique gifts, they're needed. And when we look at adolescents, it's even higher. Anti-mattering is very prevalent amongst adolescents. Almost half of adolescent surveys indicate low feelings of mattering to the people around them. Now, how do we know this is not common practice? Well, one of the things that happens is when we think about things like mattering in terms of common sense, it's just a common thing that we do for each other, we can tend to overlook it. So when we look at those same samples, while we know that over 1/3 of children indicate low feelings of mattering, we know that upwards of 1/2 of adolescents indicate low feelings of mattering. When we survey their parents, what we find is just 1/12 of them, 8% of them, reported any sense that the children that they care for feel like they matter, don't feel like they matter. So what does that tell us, right? Is that more people are experiencing anti-mattering than we think. which raises the importance of the need to make sure mattering is a deliberate practice. And not just for the children we serve, but for our community and society as a whole. Why is this critical right now? We know over the last year and a half, some things have been happening, a global pandemic. And what we know in the research is that it's resulted in increased reflection on the quality of our jobs and our lives. We know frontline workers who work with all of us in our different practices and roles have realized that they're essential, have been told that they're essential, and now they're coming back into the workplace, maybe you included, asking, do I feel essential? We know we have job insecurity plus health insecurity. We have people who may have been unemployed returning to work. We have caretakers, parents who may be unemployed returning to work. We have rising calls for social justice, which results in the question of why me? What's my role in this? And if mattering is absent, it can result in a very insidious force called a meaning deficit, which is a group of people, society asking, why me? Why here? Why now? And the risk is we can feel feelings of uselessness, worthlessness, and insignificance. And that's why mattering, I think, is the number one skill that leaders at any level, and I consider everyone in here leaders, especially if you're a caretaker of a child, is the number one skill for any person that influences another human being moving forward in the next decade or more. So why is this so important? It's so important because when human beings feel engaged, they feel emotionally connected to what they're doing, when they have energy, motivation to do what they're doing. And then when they can look back and say, my life is good, that satisfaction, it results in long-term fulfillment, which has a whole host of well-being outcomes. But these things are lagging indicators. And one of the leading indicators of engagement, motivation, satisfaction in life and work and school is the feeling that what I'm doing has meaning, that I am positive, I'm significant, and I'm purposeful. And so oftentimes we try to get people motivated or engage our kids or make sure people are satisfied without attacking the leading indicator of meaningfulness. And so I want you to keep that in mind, that all of the things we want for human beings are all lagging indicators of this idea of mattering and meaningfulness. And so we're going to really dig into this on a personal level right now. So I'm going to break you out into your initial breakout discussion, and I'm going to put the prompt here in the chat so you have it. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about a moment in your life when you most believed that you mattered. And I want to challenge you to try to call a very specific moment to mind, maybe a person, if you can think about a person. And what was said, what happened, what did it feel like, what was going on around you? I call this practice spotting. Try to spot the practices of when someone else made you feel like you mattered. And then as a group, what I'd like for you to do is to think about and observe what commonalities you noticed in that group. So introduce yourself, why you registered for this webinar today, the space between not registering and registering for you. Describe this moment, and then discuss what commonalities you noticed as a group. You'll be in about groups of 3 to 4. And so I encourage you to spend about a minute or a minute and a half per person. We'll give 8 minutes for this whole discussion, and then we'll come back and we will talk about it. So again, breakout rooms, you'll see a dialogue box come up. And when the dialogue box comes up, make sure you click join breakout room. That'll send you into the breakout room. And if you have any problems, let us know and we can help you with that. So here you go. The prompt is in the chat. And again, there's a link to the workbook as well, which you can take notes in as we go forward. So hi, everybody. Welcome back. What I'd like to do is I'd like to hear from you and to get some of your insights. So you can use the hand raise reaction below to raise your hand. But I'd like to know, what were some of the commonalities you noticed in terms of what characterized these moments? If there were people involved, what did they do? What did you notice? So feel free to go hit that hand raise icon, and would love for you to share what you noticed in your group in terms of what constitutes these moments of mattering. Or generally, what was it like having that discussion? Go for it. Angel?
Hi.
Hey.
One of the things, reflecting back, we all had different perspectives on the story we had, but the one thing that I feel was kind of the common denominator was that it was a belief from someone else came, and one of my group shared about her believing in her daughter and how it really makes a difference for their relationship, and how the daughter will share with her, and how the daughter matters. And mine was a story of a coach who believed in me. And then the other gal in our group was that her coworkers reaffirmed what she was doing. So the belief of someone else really giving us some of that empowerment, maybe.
What, if you don't mind me asking, if you don't have an answer, that's fine. But what do people who believe in you do? What are the actions that, because I think it's one of those things we can say, believe in each other or believe in somebody, but what were some things you noticed that they did?
Well, for me, my coach kind of made me believe in myself, came and told me, that I could do this, and gave me the confidence to try again. Basically, I had been cut from the basketball team freshman year, super devastating. And I wouldn't have tried out again. But the coach came to me and said, give it another shot. You can do this. I believe in you, basically. And so it gave me the confidence to say, okay, I'm willing to put myself out there, because I wasn't willing to, potentially be rejected again. So at that age, it was like, heck no.
Yeah. So somebody who can see and describe possibility for you, like what's possible because of what's good about who you are right now. That's awesome.
You articulated it much better. Thank you.
No, thanks for sharing. I mean, I always think in terms of what are the practices you can take from any situation and teach others. And I think those from yours, it's nurturing possibility around you. Because
I'm willing to
sometimes we
take
can
the risk.
Yeah. Sometimes we can think in problems, right? What's wrong with people? What's stopping people versus what's possible for people?
Like that.
Abby, how about you? Thanks, Angel.
I was taking notes on what you were saying. That's awesome. Our group was really fun. I really enjoyed learning about the other women in the group. And I feel like the commonalities were that when we believed we mattered was a moment when we had changed someone's life or we had impacted them. And we both recognized that. And so that awareness of changing for the better.
Yeah, and that is really important. So that word awareness is also a skill. So we can make a difference, but not be aware of the difference we make. And one of the best ways to become aware of the difference we make is to have someone give us evidence to be aware of. And so I think that's why that raising awareness is an important skill to both realizing that you do matter and being able to recognize the inevitable impact that you make is powerful. So good. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
Eileen?
I just wanted to share that the commonalities in the small group that I was in was that we all shared stories of compassion. And that's what the call to action was, really from that place of compassion and a desire to help. And in each scenario, each led to positive outcomes. And we talked about how it was a win-win for each person. So the person acting and the person being supported through that action, and how that resonated on both sides of that equation in a really wonderful way.
Yeah, that's powerful. I like how you talk about action, because compassion, right, is a little different than empathy. Empathy is understanding what someone's going through. Compassion is empathy in action. So it's seeing suffering or struggle and then offering an action to help alleviate that struggle. And mattering is also active. It's proactive as well. Anybody else want to share before we move into the 3 ingredients of creating a moment of mattering, which you all actually just depicted really well in your examples? Anything that wasn't said that you wanted to say?
I'll jump in really quick and just
go ahead,
say
Carla.
that what what I heard was there was a moment of doubt and someone came in and answered the specific thing about you that you doubted about yourself.
Yes.
And I think that is that sort of timing of timing is a lot of it, right? When when you think of one moment, it was like the timing came together where you had the doubt, the person had the insight, and they were free in sharing it and didn't hold it back. Yeah.
Yeah. So the specificity of how we affirm one another, right? So it goes beyond like really great leaders, caretakers, parents, right? We say, instead of saying, hey, good job, it really articulating exactly what it was that you were good at and the difference that it makes. And that specificity. And what's cool about this discussion is that we're getting into the main point of this whole session is that it's a practice. It's a deliberate practice that we can learn and maintain over time for each other, for ourselves, for the children that we serve. And so let's jump into the ingredients of mattering. And one of my favorite ways to remember this is when we code data that's not a number, we code it NaN, not a number. So it helps me remember these components. And if I'm doing this in the relationships that I'm in, and the first N is noticed, right? It's when we make eye contact. And I don't mean just physically make eye contact. I mean, create the space to understand the personal, irreplaceable details of one's life. What makes them irreplaceable as a human being? What are those factors? Who do they rely on? Who relies on them? What's their uniqueness? Those small things, and remembering those details and then regularly checking in on those details in people's lives. We're going to get into some practices there. The second is affirmed. Real affirmation is when you show someone how their uniqueness makes a unique difference. So it's specific, it's active, it's naming our unique strengths. If I were to ask you, how many thank yous do you remember? And if I were to ask, you'd probably be like, well, I don't remember specific when someone says thank you, but how many times do you remember when someone pointed out a unique gift that you have? And all of a sudden, most of us can remember that. And then finally is needed. When we notice people, when we affirm them, we show them that they're relied on, that they're indispensable. And we'll talk about why that is so important. But I want to reference back, if you were in my previous webinar, I talked about a woman named Ellen. She's a janitor that I got to interview in a study on how janitors make meaning in their work. And Ellen, you'll see here when I asked her what makes her work meaningful, she started to tell me that it was cleaning the bathrooms in these university dormitories on Monday mornings after the weekend. Does not sound pleasurable, right? But again, what we find is that purpose isn't always pleasurable. But when people feel like they matter, they tend to have a so that mentality. They can clearly see, because of their environment, how what they're doing makes an inevitable difference. And she told me that cleaning the bathrooms was the most meaningful part of her job because she would tell herself, I'm cleaning these bathrooms so that these kids don't get sick, every single time she went to clean a toilet. And what we know from interviewing thousands of people like Ellen who experience high levels of mattering, they tend to have that so that mentality. You'll also see here, if you remember, Ellen has hats on her lap. She crochets winter hats for all of the students in the dormitory she cleans in, because she said when she goes to her car in the winter and she sees the students wearing her hats, she can be reminded of why her job exists. But what's key about this story is it's really powerful story, right? It's a powerful story of someone believing that they matter, of how it just alters everything in a job that can be routine, that can be overlooked, that can be invisible. But when somebody's work is made visible, when somebody as a human being is made visible, it's powerful. And all of those beliefs started with one interaction with one supervisor in Ellen's first week on the job. She said she had to get this job because she was near homelessness. She just had to put food on her table for her kids. And she wishes she could have been anywhere but cleaning bathrooms. And that was when a supervisor just pulled out a dictionary, pulled her aside for 1 minute, she said, pulled out a dictionary and said, I want you to read this. And she read custodian as a person responsible for looking after something. And she said that was the first time in my life that somebody showed me I had actual responsibility. She said that 1.5 minute interaction altered her belief about herself, about her worth, and about her work. She's been at the university for over 30 years. She's one of the most sought after cleaners. That mentality is a result of someone giving her the evidence of their significance for 1 minute. Mattering happens in moments. And a couple of lessons here is that it's often moments we don't remember. I'm not sure that supervisor will ever remember pulling out that dictionary, creating that moment. But it essentially upended the beliefs that Ellen had about herself as a human being. And that's what we find in the research, that whether it's kids or adolescents, mattering happens in moments, small moments. And so making sure that we're taking captive, that mattering can take place today for someone else. And the second thing is that these moments can dramatically alter the trajectory of people's lives. We know from research on adolescents that repeated moments of feeling significant increase self-worth, they increase motivation. And self-worth is really the ultimate security, right? Regardless of a career or a job or what's happening, if you believe that you matter, it's a protective factor. It fosters resilience. We know that it increases serotonin and oxytocin and dopamine, the neurotransmitters that control for mood, movement, and motivation. Research on adolescence and mattering indicates that people experience lower risk of depression, lower anxiety, lower stress when we feel significant. One of my favorite studies is by Ellen Langer. She's a Harvard scientist, and she did a study where she took nursing home residents. She split them out into two groups. One group, all she did differently was give them a plant to take care of. The other group, she didn't do anything. She just observed them. She controlled for all genetic risk factors. She controlled for early mortality risk. And what she found was profound. Those who felt that they were needed by the plant, who were tasked with keeping the plant alive, twice as many people in that group were alive after 18 months in the control group. This study's been replicated time and time again. And what this shows for the children that you work with, when children feel needed, when they feel like they're indispensable, they're irreplaceable as the humans they are, we tend to be optimized as human beings. Our brains and our bodies are optimized. And that's the power of mattering. But let me just flip it a minute and talk about the power of anti-mattering. So one of the groups I was asked to work with was a group of window washers. And a lot of these people were, as their supervisor said, not motivated. And what I find, whether it's working with children, adolescents, or workers, most motivation issues are really anti-mattering issues in disguise. And what happened is I went down to these window washers and I just asked them, hey, if you were running this place, what would you do? And they lit up. This was not an unmotivated group, right? I just asked a different question. I asked them for their wisdom. But one woman said, Zach, I've been coming here for 5 years, and every single day I have to clean the bottom floor windows of this industrial complex. But every afternoon at 3 p.m., the sprinkler system comes on and splashes the windows and leaves watermarks. So the next day I come in and I do an avoidable task. And in my first week on the job, I went to my supervisor and I said, hey, I have an idea. What if we aimed the sprinklers the other way? And the supervisor said, that is the sprinkler people's problem. It's not our problem. Do your job. And she said that for the next 5 years, she just put her head down, and she was already struggling in her personal life, and she felt like she didn't matter. And here's what we find, these little moments of mattering. Now you may think, what is wrong with these supervisors? In our organizations, in our families, in our homes, we have little sprinkler moments, little sprinkler issues where we create little moments that disaffirm someone's mattering. And what we find with interviewing people who experience anti-mattering, they say things like this: it really rakes on me. Raking means to scrape away and makes me feel worthless. Why bother? The person who gave me that story said, I feel completely pointless as a person. When we experience that what we're doing is futile, that we don't have a meaningful role, that we don't have a voice in the group around us, it can rake on people. And I think that's the best word to describe it. But what's powerful is that, as we've talked about, leadership and creating mattering is a hard skill. It's something that we can learn. It's the fundamentals of being human. And one of the things that I'll encourage you to do is think about what you want the people around you to feel. And then I want you to look at your to-do list. What is on your to-do list that will strategically create the feelings that you want people to feel today, right? Oftentimes what we do is we write what we have to do today, all of the things and the tasks that we have to do, but we often relegate how we want others to feel around us, whether it's children or each other. We relegate that to intuition. I'll just do it, I'll do it naturally. And the problem with that is what creates that gap between common sense and common practice. So taking some of these practices and turning them into hard skills that we get on our to-do list is what can make mattering a norm for the kids we work with, for each other as well. So let's jump into the first practice area. The first practice area is noticing people. Now, I want to capture what noticing is. There's a big difference between knowing somebody and noticing them. You can know your best friend, but not notice that they're suffering. You can know your team around you, but not notice that somebody's parent is in the hospital. You can know your kid, but not notice that they're struggling. Noticing is an act. It's an act of being attuned to signals and signs that show us how someone's actually doing. It's also being able to think about, gather information about personal details of someone's life, and then taking the opportunity to think about those people and offer an action to show that we're thinking about them. One of my favorite examples comes from a 5-year-old boy who was growing up in Brooklyn. He had a single mom and he had one toy. And the only toy he had was a deck of playing cards. And he'd bring this deck of playing cards to the Brooklyn Library every day. His mother, who didn't have childcare, would drop him off at the Brooklyn Library in the care of the librarians there. And he'd sit there all day and he'd shuffle this deck of playing cards. And one day, after about a week and a half of going, a librarian came up to him and said, "Hey, I've noticed that you bring this deck of cards in. We just got a book in on how to do card tricks. Would you like to learn one?" And she gave him this book on how to do card tricks. He said that he devoured the book in a day and he started learning from the pictures how to do a card trick. And he showed his mom when his mom picked him up and she was floored, smiled super big. And he said, "I realized that's what I loved. I loved creating this experience for my mom, who had a really difficult life." And then the next week, the librarian brought him a Houdini book on how to do Houdini tricks. And he said that he felt seen. Now, that boy grew up to be David Blaine, the world-renowned illusionist and magician. And what's powerful about this story is it shows us the practice of noticing. So think about this. He says that that librarian, if it wasn't for that librarian taking an interest, noticing him bringing the deck of cards amongst the thousands of people that go in and out of the Brooklyn Library every day, he would have never realized this passion and this gift that he had. And here's the practice, right? She noticed this little unique trait of him, this one person. She thought about him, and then she took an action to show him that he was thought about. That's the practice of noticing, and it can alter the trajectory of people's lives. It can also galvanize groups together, whether it's family units or teams together or groups of children together. This is Ernest Shackleton's crew in 1915. And they were exploring the Antarctic when the Endurance, the ship that they were on, got stuck in a block of ice for years. And they were almost surely going to run out of food, and it was almost surely certain death. But Ernest Shackleton, instead of having which I would have done, having a big panicked speech about how we're going to survive, the first thing he did, according to diaries, was go around to each of his crew members, ask about who they missed back home, what birthdays they wouldn't be able to celebrate, what holidays they like to celebrate. And what he would do is he would write them down, and he would bring out all of the food stores and have these big banquets to celebrate the things that were important to each individual. And it was and the antithesis to what these people thought surviving looked like. He would also talk to the astronomers about the stars. He would talk to the scientists on board about their science. He would scrub the deck with the people that were scrubbing the decks. And one person wrote in their diary that those years were the happiest years of my life, surviving. And when Shackleton left, he sailed for 5 months to go get help, left his whole crew on Elephant Island. They said that the first thing he did when they came back was he went around to each person and started checking in with how they're doing and about these personal details of their lives that he remembered. And what's powerful about this, right, is that when people feel seen, they'll do anything for you. They feel committed to you. They feel emotionally engaged and motivated, and it inspires resilience. It was the only Antarctic expedition in the early 1900s that didn't lose a single crew member. Leadership is about seeing people. So how can we do this? One is to make eye contact and create the space to authentically check in with the people around us and the children around us. For example, I have a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old now. Oh gosh, that just happened last week, and a 4-year-old. And one of the things my 7-year-old has been doing is he always tells me, he says, Zach, Daddy, I want to watch my tablet. Can I watch my tablet? He loves the tablet, the screen. And what I was doing before I started really digging into some of this mattering work is I started just saying, no, no tablet time, or here's a timer. And I realized that what I was doing was essentially just not seeing him. And what I started doing instead is I started going down, and I went down to his eye level, and he was watching a show, and I just said, hey, what are you watching? And then he started talking to me. And then I asked, what do you like about this show? And you can guess what happened. Well, very slowly the tablet shut, and we started having a conversation, right? Even with a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, the yearning to be seen is a primal human desire. So creating that space to take an interest in what someone's doing is critical. The second piece is asking about, remembering, and checking in on personal details. There was a leader I worked with. She worked in a distribution center. There were about 19 teams. They were all highly disengaged except for hers. They all scored really high on these engagement surveys. And I just asked the team, I said, what's going on here? And they said, well, we would do anything for our leader. She has our back. We do anything for her. And I said, well, how does she do that? And so I went to her and I asked, and she said, Zach, every Monday morning for 5 minutes, I look at this notebook. And she pulls out this moleskin notebook. And she goes, every Friday, I write down things I heard my people talk about, whether it was their kids' names, where they were going on vacation, if someone in their family was sick. And every Monday morning, I start my morning by looking at these notes. It takes about 10 minutes a week. And then I make a note to myself to make sure I check in with at least one of these personal details with each person over that week. Right. So people ask me, like, is this just come naturally to certain people? And I say, no, it's a deliberate practice. Like, she had that practice. What is your practice for remembering and checking in on people's personal details? Noticing others' moods, inquiring and offering to do something to help. Whether it's a peer or a child, when somebody's struggling, don't just say, empathize. I understand that's really difficult. Offer a proactive action, an option to help alleviate that suffering. And again, that's that difference between empathy and compassion. Compassion is empathy plus an action to alleviate what someone's going through. And this can happen in small ways. A couple of weeks ago, I was on a Zoom call with a client, and they had a work team, and some of the people went through their regular check-ins, and they said, I'm overwhelmed. And I remember the client who I was coaching, the leader said, well, we have the standing meeting on Fridays. It's an hour and a half. Why don't everybody take it to get caught up on what they're going through, right? Even those little things you can do for each other is an act of compassion. Ask others for their opinions, especially our children, and then appreciate people's small, everyday acts that they do. One of the things that I like to do is to really think about the people around me. And this could be whether the children you serve or your team or anybody that works in your orbit every day, and really do like an inventory of who you need to see more. What don't you know about the people around you? Who haven't you shown them the evidence that you see them or notice them? So what I want you to do right now is take about a minute of time just to list maybe 2 people that you really know you need to notice more as we've been going through this first section. And then think about what is one action you could take from some of these ideas that we've talked about that you could more readily and explicitly show them that they're noticed. So take about a minute to think about this. What are 2 or 2 people that you could notice more, and what is one action you can take to help them feel seen? And if it is that delivery driver that you don't know their name, that could be an action, right? To ask them their name. It doesn't have to be just work related. This is a community effort. So I'll give you 45 seconds of awkward Zoom silence time. And then what I'd love for you to do is just type in who that person is. You don't have to type their name. Maybe they're just their relation to you. And then what is one action you'll take to help them feel noticed as a result of this session? And I love this other piece in the chat that just came up, love as a verb. And the same with mattering, right? Mattering is something that's done through some of these actions that we'll see in the chat here. So type in the chat, who is someone you need to notice more? And what's one action you'll take to help them feel noticed? I'll give you an example. I see a lot of people writing down, which is good. Put some of those ideas in the chat. Oh, good. Thanks, Patricia. So, neighbor, so busy during the holidays, don't have time to talk. Check in, ask how they're doing. New coworker, right? So think about the different scenarios people are in and who you can check in with. Someone who's starting, right? That's new. Oftentimes we don't necessarily think to check in on how that's going. Unofficial assistant, making sure she knows she's appreciated and ask about her family. Good. One of the powerful pieces of advice that I've heard is to schedule your good intentions. I'm the most amazing person when I'm out walking my dog and I'm like, oh, I should really write this person a thank you note. But have some system in place that when you think about that good intention, to put it on your calendar. Get it on your to-do list, at the top of your to-do list. Sister, make time to call and chat. Notice my sister more, a bit isolated from other family members. Supervisors at hospice, go by the office, check in. Is there people I need to connect with? Good. So someone who's lonely, how they're doing, a cousin who lost their daughter to COVID. I mean, that's why, especially right now when people are going through these things, right? Asking how people are doing, offering action to alleviate the suffering. And people may not be ready to talk about it or offer the action, but just being offered that someone's thinking about us, remembers us, is powerful. Younger brother, good. Keep all of this coming in, right? If we just do one of these things in the next week, it's a profound leadership act as well. And a lot of times it starts in our local areas where we are. A couple of other practices that you might think about is just asking better questions when you check in with people, instead of, hey, how are you doing? Or, hey, how have you been? Right? If someone asks me how I'm doing, especially right now, I have no idea. I can't even tell you how I'm doing right now. But if someone asks me, what are you working on today? I can tell you. Or when somebody asks me, anything you're struggling with today, I could probably tell you that. Or if anybody asks me, what has most of your attention right now? Or a great one to ask your kids is, what have you been thinking about today? Or who have you helped today? Who's helped you today? The questions we ask ourselves and each other determine where people focus their attention. And it can be very powerful to refocus people's attention, on what matters. So oftentimes these little tweaks in the questions we ask can be profound. And then I want to give you a personal example how mattering has really impacted me, and people who probably don't even remember me or remember my son have impacted him. This is Jackson. He is now 4, but in this picture, he was much younger. He was born with a very rare condition called blepharophimosis epicanthus inversus syndrome. You can say that 5 times fast. He had about a 1 in 50,000 chance of having this. He was born with no eyelid muscle, and his eye openings are much smaller than the average human face. And one of the things that we experienced very early on was experiences of anti-mattering. We go to a playground and kids would look at him and say, why is he so weird? Why is his eyes so weird? Or we'd have other parents say, why is he so sleepy? And you could notice a shyness develop. When someone stares at you and doesn't talk to you, it develops, even in kids, a shyness. And I remember going to the Denver Children's Hospital here in Colorado, and these 2 volunteers, when we were going for a surgery consultation, they got up. They immediately walked out from beyond their desk, remember taking an action. They got down at his eye level. They didn't even look at us. And they said, you are so cute. We are so glad that you're here. And then all of a sudden, right, that primal desire to be seen, even in a 2-year-old, was activated. He came out from behind the legs. He started smiling. You could just see the little oxytocin hit that he got from being seen. And as parents as well, like I felt mattering on behalf of him. Was that in their job description to do that? It wasn't, right? It's these little things of going beyond, of getting down to someone's eye level, of really checking in, that is a profound leadership act. And Carla and I were talking at the break, we tend to focus on the big things, right? But nobody's going on LinkedIn being like, I remembered someone's full name today, right? People are posting their big awards or the big program outcomes, but it's actually these small things that leave legacies, that achieve this bigger vision that you all want in the county, right? So commit to making these small acts common practice, especially in terms of getting it on your to-do list. So the second practice is affirming. And many of you mentioned this as powerful, and real affirmation is showing someone exactly how their uniqueness makes a unique difference. One of the powerful practices is to tell people, tell children, show people the stories of the impact that they made. For example, when my 7-year-old, one day he just tied his younger brother's shoes, got his shoes on without us asking, and just being like, see how we're getting out the door and your brother's really happy. Like, your thoughtfulness made that possible. So telling the story of what people make possible through their strengths. That distribution center that I worked with, they were all distribution center managers. And this is a story I tell regularly to tell you the power of telling a story of impact. And this group was very disengaged. They distribute very small medical device widgets that go to an MRI manufacturer. And it was the same group that I had mentioned earlier from the distribution center. And I just stopped and asked them, I said, why are you here? And they couldn't really answer the question, except for one woman in the front started crying. And she said, I'm realizing last month why I'm here. She said, I was diagnosed with an early stage cancer. I was in an MRI machine. I looked up at the logo on the MRI machine, and I remembered seeing it in our on our boxes in our distribution center packing areas. And she said this to her group, I'm realizing right now that my job has existed for the last 12 years to save my own life. You talk about an antidote to employee disengagement or disengagement of any time, that room changed, right? And what's powerful is we went down and we noticed that the distribution center packers, the frontline packers, had no idea of their upstream impact. So we brought stories of how customers' lives were changed and saved into their weekly safety meetings and showed them these stories routinely every week. It was the only thing that we did. Engagement went up, turnover went down. And this is a powerful lesson to make sure with anybody that you're working with or mentoring that we give them vivid stories of the difference that they make, that we essentially put a face to the name. How do they make a difference for us? This is Dr. Turner. He's a radiologist in Israel. He did a study on putting a face to the name with radiologists who take medical scans, read the scans, and then send them back. And what he did is for half the group, he just put the patient's headshot on the scan and measured what would happen to the results. For the other group, he sent the scans as usual. Now, all of the groups indicated that they felt purpose in their work, right, as radiologists. But the people that saw the headshot on the scan self-reported 80% more time was spent interpreting the scan. They also wrote double the amount of incidental findings that would be important to the patient's future prognosis and twice as long interpretations, right? They both felt that sense of purpose, which many of us, you feel in your work and what you're doing. But the group that had the face to the name, that they could think about their impact, that had the story of their impact in front of them, was optimized as human beings. So telling stories of people's impact is powerful. This is a group of plumbers that I worked with, commercial plumbing contractors. After a 14-hour shift, here comes Zach, the Mattering guy. I took a picture of them because they didn't want me to be there. They were actually griping about me being there. And I just showed them this picture. This is my 7-year-old stuffing his face with a donut when he was not 7. You can see the joy on his face. I showed them this picture. But what you don't know is that that plaza behind them is a new plaza. It's a new shopping center here in town. And this company actually built that plaza. So this Saturday joy that my kid gets is because of them. And I just showed this to them. I say, what do you notice? And one of the guys in the back got up and said, oh, that's the exchange. We worked on that project. And all of a sudden the nonverbals changed, right? They shot up, they looked around, and they were engaged, right? Leaders who create mattering whether you're a coach, whether you're a parent, whether you're a mentor, whether you're a foster parent, make sure people can vividly see how they make an impact on your family, on others, on the classroom, wherever you are. And one of the ways to do that is to give people stories of their significance in one-on-one settings. I call this purposeful affirmation. So instead of just telling people good job, make sure you show them the difference that they make. So for example, describe the situation. When and where did it occur? So at the beginning of this Zoom call today, Carla, that's when and where it happened. Like with my kid, when you sat down before we were trying to get out to the car and you found Jackson's shoes and put them on, right? Being specific of when you're affirming somebody is powerful because it shows that you notice them. It's not just a blind thank you or good job. The second element of good affirmation is the behavior. So what did the person do? So at the beginning of this session, this Zoom session today, when Carla was introducing me, she very positively contextualized this session in the bigger vision of First Five, right? So Carla is a good contextualizer. She was positive. Those are her strengths. And she incorporated the vision into that context. And then 5, what was the impact? It made me feel how I was contributing to this bigger vision. And I think oriented everybody on this call to have these experiences. And if it wasn't for Carla engaging this session, these elements and actions of noticing that are coming in the chat that are going to profoundly alter people's lives in the next week wouldn't be able to happen. So thank you, Carla. Right? Situation, behavior, impact. It takes about the same amount of time to do that as it does to say, thanks, Carla, for having me. Right? But when we can notice the specific strengths and gifts, it's powerful. Do this with your kids, right? Show them exactly the gifts they have and the impact that they make. It can be powerful. So one of the actions that I want you to think about taking, and you have a template in your handout, is who needs to be shown the difference that they make. And take the opportunity, after this session or in the next couple of days, to actually write them a purposeful affirmation. Now, you're probably not going to sit down with a kid and be like, hey, I'm doing the SBI model S, but making sure that when you're giving affirmation that we're pointing out people's strengths, we're naming those strengths, and we're telling them a story of how that impacted us. Hey, Tapley, you went and found Jackson's shoes, and without me asking, you put them on in a really thoughtful and kind way. And you are a really important part of our family because you're thoughtful and kind, right? That is a different thing than saying, thanks for doing that, Tapley, right? So be thinking about how you can restructure some of this affirmation. And Susan had mentioned handout, but Georgia will put that into the chat again so you all have it as well. And there's a nice template there that you can use to do that. The other thing is to show people meaningfulness. There's 3 elements to any meaningful task, right? Significance is that people know how it benefits others. Identity is they know how what they're being asked to do makes a bigger whole possible. And then the third is that they know how they can use their unique strengths to do it. So whether you're giving a child a task or giving each other tasks or thinking about something that you need to do, make sure these 3 elements are present in how you deliver that task. I do a lot of work with educators on how to create meaningfulness in the classroom. And this is really key, right? Instead of like, here's this homework that you have to do, here's how learning this can help benefit other people in the world, in the classroom. Here's what doing this will make possible for you. At the end of this year, you'll be able to read a book on your own. And then I know you have these strengths. I know you're a really detail-oriented kid. You're a creative kid, and I need you to use that to do this, right? All of a sudden, homework is not homework, or all of a sudden, a task is not just a task. It becomes connected to something bigger. You reveal the significance in what people are doing. So think about that as well. And think about this in your own life. If you're having trouble thinking about or getting motivated to do a routine task, ask yourself, how does this benefit others? What does this make possible? How can I use my strengths to do it? And then ask more meaningful questions, especially when mentoring children. What do you want to do with your life? What do you want your life to do for others? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What kind of impact do you want to have made in 5 years from now? What's your ideal job or ideal next step? What kind of problems do you want to solve with your strengths? Where do you think you're most needed? What's powerful is that sometimes especially when working with children, we can focus on what can be better about them versus what's good about who they already are. And what's good about who they already are is going to make that future possibility possible, right, for them. And so making sure we're asking questions that reaffirm their mattering now versus saying that you'll matter when you get into college, right? I did a lot of work with first generation college students. And one of the deficiencies in working with students who were the first in their family to go to college was that we would say that once you get into college, you've made it, right? But what happens is that puts off someone's worth. We live in this if-then argument. If only you achieve this, then you'll be worth something, versus really showing people what's good about who they are now and what they contribute and how those things are the things that can help them create the future that they want, is a meaningful way to create affirmation. So a couple of practices: know and name others' unique strengths. Think of the children you work with. Think about the people around you. Could you go around and name 2 or 3 unique gifts that are unique about that person than someone else? Show others how those strengths make a difference on you or the people around you. Show them what they do, how that makes possible, and not just what their work makes possible for those around you, but what their strengths make possible for you, a group, or others. And then think about the questions you ask. Are you asking questions that assume that their mattering is just a few years off, or are you reaffirming their mattering now? And then the last piece before we break out into our final breakout session to discuss all of this and where we want to focus our energy moving forward from this webinar is the feeling of being needed. Now, I want to give you an example of how feeling needed works and why it's so critical to well-being and commitment and to motivation and to having the energy to continue on and for resilience. If I were to ask you to come to a dinner party tomorrow and you were like, yeah, I'll come, and that's it, and then you woke up tomorrow, you don't really know this Zach guy, and then you realize you had this dinner party at night, on a scale of 1 to 10 in your mind, how easy would it be for you to get out of the plan? 1 being easy, 10 being very hard, right? It's pretty easy. You just said, yeah, I'll be there. Well, I'm not going to come. But if I said to you the night before, if I said, hey, Carla, I really need you to bring dessert tomorrow to my dinner party, will you come? And Carla says, yes. And then Carla wakes up tomorrow and is like, I don't feel like going, but Zach needs me to bring dessert, right? It's very hard to say no. When we feel needed, it results in commitment. It results in emotional energy. It results in engagement. It results in that energy we need to keep going, which is why it's critical for resilience and motivation. In Gordon Flett's book, The Psychology of Mattering, there's a study that's referenced on people who are considering harming themselves, and they look at their journals and what they write down. And it's particularly for adolescents. And these 2 phrases were common amongst almost every journal that was reviewed by researchers. Nobody would miss me if I was gone. That's a mattering issue. That's a needed issue. And no one cares about me. So this idea of feeling indispensable, of feeling relied on, is powerful. We've seen some good aspects of that, right, during the pandemic. I know good in pandemic is an oxymoron, but showing people their essentialness, right, has been powerful. But how do we make sure that we're being essential thinkers for all of the people around us, that we're making sure people know what would happen if it wasn't for them in our lives? And one of my favorite stories about this, and I mentioned this in our previous webinar, is making sure you connect not only yourself to this bigger purpose or vision, but connect people and show them how they're indispensable to something bigger. Whether it's your team, whether it's a group, a classroom, how do they make the bigger vision possible? And my favorite story about this is when John F. Kennedy went to the Space Center at NASA. He was about to give a speech on the Apollo missions, and he went into a mop closet that he thought was a green room. And he just said, hey, what do you do here, to the janitors? And the janitor very calmly got up and said, oh, I'm putting a person on the moon. And then went back down into his work. And what researchers found is that NASA at the time had what was called a ladder to the moon, where each individual could see exactly how their input, that their efforts tangibly, measurably would put a person on the moon by the end of the decade. This is it's a leadership practice in terms of not just showing people their ladder, but in thinking about exactly how each individual, each child you interact with is indispensable, is essential for making something bigger possible and being able to show them. And what it prompts us to do is to think about who we rely on, who and how we rely on them, and then saying this language, if it wasn't for you. Think about those times in your life where someone has said, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have this job. We just had one in our breakout with Georgia and Carla, right? If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now, right? We don't get that too often. And it's because we tend to not give it very often, to others. But I encourage you to think about this. Think about someone that you rely on. Think about a child. Think about someone in your family, someone in your work that you rely on that you've never said, if it wasn't for you, and showed them their ladder to what they make possible in your life, or what they make possible in a family unit, or what they make possible in a classroom. I think it's powerful when people see that. So a couple practices: say, if it wasn't for you. Tell people how much you rely on them. Notice when they're gone. Show people what they make possible, and ask people for help. Really making sure you're telling people that you miss them, because when we can show people the evidence, the significance of their absence, we're really showing them the evidence of their significance, of when they're there, when they're present. And so when you think about these things, noticed, affirmed, and needed, when these things come together, it's really powerful. So one way to think about your relationships is to think about, do an audit. When's the last time I made this person feel noticed? When's the last time I made this person feel affirmed? When is the last time I made this person feel needed? What may I need to invest in to help them feel this way? And as we move into our last breakout, I want you to think about those three elements. I want you to think about the feelings of I'm valued, and I'm adding value, some of these practices. And what you have in that packet as you leave here today, there's a self-assessment that you can take. And the self-assessment, now that you understand these components, will give you a score on where you're at as a leader in each of these components. So you can it really shows yourself what you can work on as a mattering, creating leader. But just to get into it, we're going to do an informal self-assessment today. And we're going to go into our final breakout room and then come back and close our session. But I want you to go back into your breakout room, and after learning about these practice areas, think about which area, noticed, affirmed, and needed, do you most want to improve in when it comes to how you work with others, how you parent, how you mentor, how you engage with your team. And what is one action that from that new self-awareness that you could commit to beginning as a habit to create more mattering? And then share that with your group. And think about, as a group, what did you notice? What were some commonalities in group? What are the areas that people felt like they needed to invest in? And then we'll come back and we'll share some of those things in just about 8 minutes. And then I'll wrap it up with some more tools that you can use to carry this conversation forward. So the prompt is in the chat. So what is one area do you feel like you most want to improve in? And what's one action you'll take? And then we will come back and wrap up our session together with some of the learnings from our breakout. So just give me a second. Again, that dialog box will come up. Make sure you click join, and then you'll go into your breakout session and enjoy this conversation. Great. Hey, everybody, welcome back. Thanks for that discussion. What I'd like to do as we close here is I'd like to have you in the chat, if you could write one insight that you had today that you'll take action on in a sentence or even a few words. What is one insight that you had today that you will take action on and may have come out of that session that you just had with your group? That would be great, so we can see some of everybody's learnings. So let's take a minute and just take a few minutes to think about one action item, and then I'll address Susan's question and another common question that comes up in this discussion. Carla, I like that. Tell 5 people if it weren't for you. Yeah, ask for help. Sometimes when we can give up our authority, whether it's as parents or educators or whatever, like, it's powerful. Like, even asking kids for help, sharing what we're struggling with can help model that vulnerability. Asking better questions. I wish I had asked those questions when I was younger. Yeah, me too. We were just talking about that. Oh, that's a good question, Susan. Cultural differences in practicing mattering. Yeah. So one of the things to think about is that mattering can look, those key areas are very consistent across cross-culturally. Those come out of cross-cultural research, but how people experience feeling noticed or affirmed or needed can vary. So sometimes, especially if you're working with people that you can have the conversations with, what helps you feel seen here? What helps you feel noticed here? What helps you feel like you're important here? In getting some of the data from the context you're working in is really important. So that's a good question, Susan. Calendaring my good intentions, if it weren't for you, good. Specific check-ins, excellent. There was someone that said, is there such thing as too much indicated that a person is needed? I see parents repeating over and over and over. I don't, I've never seen that. So I'm glad that there's that feeling needed that's going on, but it's really just when it's authentically, when you can authentically provide a story where you can show someone that they're relied on versus just saying it as an automatic action. So this is also important. Some of this stuff can become just routine, right? Some people just want to say it and we just say it, but we don't mean it. Really making sure it stays authentic by having the specificity of how someone is needed is really important. And I think that adds a lot of authenticity to it and a lot of weight to it by using some of those specific practices. Carla also mentioned that some people, especially in this field, because you're in this field, you can sort of be over noticers or you're naturally compassionate, right? You want to take on everybody's problem and you can internalize it. And the key is also knowing your boundaries. When you're internalizing someone else's issues or problems to the point where it's detracting from your energy that you need to actually respond to those things as the professional you are in the role that you're in, then that's where you bleed the line into burnout and compassion fatigue and things like that. But also the act of noticing is not just about problems, as you've mentioned, it's about just checking in with people. So those people that you interact with that you've maybe talked to them 6 months ago and then you connect with them and they ask you about how that project was going that you talked about them 6 months ago, and all of a sudden it's like you feel seen. Sometimes it's simple things like that. So you don't have to take the noticing practice and say, I need to know everybody's deepest, darkest problems and take that on. It's more of, I'm creating a routine regularly to check in with people as in my role. So that's an important point as well. But yeah, look at all of this coming in here. Someone says, this is, I think, important. As a former first year youth and offer, I struggle with the practical application of this to foster children by any real measure of mattering. We do not in the system, and having a social worker pretend otherwise would hurt and be gaslighting. Yeah, so you have systemic anti-mattering from a social higher systems thing. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is interpersonal mattering. Any social worker, I think, should be able to show a child exactly what is good about them, notice them, show them their strengths, reveal their strengths, and show them that they're irreplaceable as human beings in a one-on-one setting. And so the larger system forces of systemic mattering are the case when these noticed, affirmed, and needed things become system properties, which I think they need to be, as you could probably tell. But yeah, I mean, always the mattering is created through interpersonal interactions. And so what we're talking about is interpersonal mattering. So thanks for that. Thank you all so much for being here. I know we're just out of time. Great questions, great discussion in the chat, and great actions that are coming across in the chat. So I'm glad that this is useful and helpful for you all. And again, there's really nothing more powerful than a human being who believes they matter. And there are some studies around foster children in the book, The Psychology of Mattering. There's also some studies around the homeless population as well, even in systems that are not built to create mattering, how individuals can create mattering for each other. And ultimately, that's how we change systems. So thank you all so much. Thanks, Carla,
Yeah,
again, for having me.
we're all giving you applause from our various computers all around, and thanking you so much, Zach, for your expertise and your work, and
course.
frankly for dedicating your life to this, because I know I'm walking away feeling refreshed, reminded of what matters to me at a deep level. So thank you for
Awesome.
bringing this to us. And just so everyone knows, we're going to send out that email after this with our feedback survey, and we really rely on getting your feedback so that we can tailor what we provide to our community. So appreciate your responses to that. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. You
Thanks,
matter.
everybody.
Take care.
Bye.